Hi, everyone. I'm Gary Berman, host of the Cyber Hero Adventure Show. Welcome. We have an incredibly special show today about the Cyberspace Solarium Commission update. And before that, I want to just show you a recent update. So someone asked me the other day the source of my kind of superpower, and I said, well, I've been to over 53 cybersecurity conferences, and I know everyone in my audience has done the exact same thing. So I went a little crazy, went to Black Hat out in Las Vegas. Thank God everything went very well, and got some really interesting insights from some of the smartest people in the world about things that are happening now. And so speaking of smartest people in the world, let me bring into the show Chuck Brooks of Brooks Consulting International. Hey, Chuck.
It's great to be on the show, Barry. Gary, great being here.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us. And I never thought I would sort of suck up to anyone, but I've been a fan of yours for a long time. And wow, you really are a real life unsung cyber hero. So tell our audience a little bit about your origin story.
Sure. Yeah, I'm originally from Chicago and came out to Washington, D.C. To work after graduating from the University of Chicago. And I found myself quickly involved in sort of the policymaking arena of Washington, worked with Senator late Senator on technology and security issues. Back then, cyber wasn't a high priority like it is now, but it started my interest in security. And then I went on to be one of the first people at the Department of Homeland Security, helped set up the Science and Technology Directorate, and set up other activities too in legislative affairs. And then worked in several industry companies, from Xerox to General Dynamics to SRA, in government relations, security roles. And most recently, I started my own consulting company during COVID, which has worked out well. And I teach at Georgetown part-time in cyber risk management program. So
when do you sleep?
I don't. I'm an insomniac. I have doing my writing at night and being on social media. But that's been my problem my whole life.
Well, really, thank you for being a real life unsung cyber hero and for being with us today. And speaking of real life unsung cyber heroes, let me introduce to our audience Sam Visner from MITRE and Georgetown. Hey, Sam, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me again, Gary. And always good to see my friend Chuck Brooks. You always get an impressive group of people. I'm sorry, present company accepted, of course, but it's always an honor to be with you.
Indeed. And you, we were talking prior to recording of the show, you have been with us 4 times. And I'm going to borrow something from Saturday Night Live, where if you're a 5-timer, you get some kind of jacket or something. So, here's the template of what we can send you. This is my cyber hero costume. I don't recommend you wear it because it can impugn your credibility or be misunderstood, but I can get you a cape. So what color cape would you like?
You know what? I think, I want to continue to, like the Addams family, I'm going to pretend I'm just like everyone else. Seems like today blue is my color, and I think I have the cape I need.
Fair enough. And, so you've done some unbelievably interesting things in your career, and most recently you're with MITRE. Maybe you can share with our audience some of the cool things you're doing.
Well, thank you. I'm now a fellow with the MITRE Corporation, which runs some of the nation's federally funded research and development centers. And I completed last year my term as the director of the National Cybersecurity Federally Funded Research and Development Center. Right now, I'm leading a small team on building a national roadmap for United States leadership in 6G. Also working on the issue of space systems cybersecurity, which I think is, given the importance of the space sector, the possibility that it might be named a sector of the nation's critical infrastructure, I think is vitally important. And I think, as your listeners and viewers already know, I've run a few cybersecurity businesses. I teach as an adjunct at Georgetown, and I'm the former chief of signals intelligence programs at the U.S. National Security Agency.
Wow, that's cool. And coincidentally, you mentioned space, but we're going to be doing a show upcoming on space because of its importance, and it's so topical for so many reasons. And one of our special guests is going to be the CEO of Iridium. Matt Desch is going to be on that recording, so stay tuned to that. They're doing some unbelievably interesting stuff with constellation satellites, and I came across him when I was watching a show on 60 Minutes, and I heard in the background a guy talking about space junk, and who would have thought that there is such a thing, but it is, and it's real, and so we're looking forward to that future episode with Iridium and you from MITRE, Sam. So thanks so much.
Well, now as we have some 4,000 or 5,000 satellites in orbit, and we're talking about having tens of thousands of satellites in orbit, as some of them decay and some of them degrade, this issue of space junk is likely to become more important as we face the challenge of essentially space traffic management and the security and resilience of these systems. So stay tuned, a lot more to come.
Indeed. Speaking of staying tuned, let me bring you to the show Shahid Shah from Medici. Hey, Shahid, welcome to the show.
Hi there. Yeah, it's only the third time for me. So Sam over there beat me on.
All right. Well, we can have a friendly competition. Everyone benefits. The audience listens and learns and gets smarter, stronger. It's good for the community, good for our sponsors, and good for everyone. And on a personal note, good for my wife. So thank you all for helping improve my life at home by being here today. So with that in mind, let's jump into the topic at hand here. This is incredibly interesting. What's happened here with the 2021 report, because first of all, just that it exists. My sense as an observer is that the contours of the cybersecurity ecosystem are not unlike an aircraft carrier, very large and massive and, but kind of slow to turn and pivot, but it's got all this kinetic stuff going on, all the planes and everything, all the craziness, within that environment. And one of the things that I've listened and learned about is some things change, but some things don't. And the fact that they came up this in the last week or so with this report card and implementation, I think is a great sign. So Chuck, what do you think about that?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm a big fan of the Cyberspace Solarium Commission. I think they've created a great framework for what we need to do in cybersecurity. It's about time, and I'm happy to see that a lot of this has been implemented. At least I think they're saying that 70% of these implementations are taking place. The good news, I think, is that they're taking place. The bad news on some of this is that a lot of it takes funding, and a lot of this is not earmarked or allocated to specific programs. So I think we still have a long way to go, but I think the biggest part of the report is it really is an educational tool. Most of government doesn't know what's going on in cybersecurity or has the expertise, and this sort of sets up a model or a framework for them to use it and understand some of the specific requirements needed. And so one of the requirements is creating an Office of Technology Assessment again, which I think is direly needed because most of the staff and people from my experience on the Hill just don't have the expertise. So I think this could serve as a catalyst to get us ahead now that we're waking up a little bit to the dire threats that are facing us in cybersecurity, and how, since we're all interconnected, now that the implications are much greater if something does happen.
Indeed, and to build on that point, I did a show just recently, last week or two, about the White House announcement, forward-leaning cybersecurity, and I got an email from a very senior person at CISA asking if I knew the contact person that they could talk to about this. And to me, as an outside observer, there's an opportunity to improve, communications. And one of the things that I've noticed, and I listen and learn from all of you, is that criminals are horizontally structured. So they share information and services and resources freely, but the white hats, the defenders, are more vertically structured, because of legal constraints, intellectual property, money, stuff like that. Shahid, what's your thought about that assessment? Is that a valid? That we need to get more horizontal, we need to be sharing a lot more because that's what the criminals do?
It definitely is. And the way to think about this report is that if you are in the public sector, in leadership roles of the public sector, you should be diving into this report, learning as much as you can about it, to get yourself familiar with the kinds of laws, policies, et cetera, that senior leadership is thinking about, so that you can help inject new policies and procedures that you think might be missing. There's a second group of folks that should pay some lightweight attention to it, and that is very large commercial sector entities, especially those that are in the cybersecurity space. Where they can be super helpful is they can help move beyond the bullshit. Because a lot of these kind of documents, having worked in government for many years and having helped produce a lot of these kind of documents, they are so high level in some cases as to be completely useless. But there are nuggets in there, right? Chuck mentioned this. There are nuggets in there. If you're in the medium to large company business, where you are in the cyber business, read this to understand how you move away the bullshit so you can get the legal folks that are in policy circles, et cetera, to start thinking about the right things. We know in the industry all the stuff that we need to do. That is not the problem overall. What we don't know is at the micro level, what is the tasking that needs to be done? How do we get the money for it? When we get the money for it, how do we make sure it flows to the right people? So, if you're in government, spend a lot of time on it. If you're in large companies, do what we were talking about here. Then there are a lot of folks that are in the small business area. They're day-to-day cyber people. Ignore this, right? It's just noise for you guys. It's not going to really make a difference in the way that you actually do your job. Now, what will make a difference in how you do your job, this goes to Gary's point, is now think about and say, well, how do I get my team? Let's say you're at a hospital, like I help a number of healthcare systems. You're at a pharmaceutical company building vaccines. If you are not getting together with other pharmaceutical manufacturers, and you're at a hospital not getting together with other hospitals, you're at a pizza shop not getting together with other pizza shop owners, you are just a recipe for getting hacked, whether it's ransomware today, some privilege escalation tomorrow. It's just a matter of time before you're going to get steamrolled, because, like Gary is saying, the hackers are working together. We do not, except in legal, ethical, et cetera ways. So when you look at these kind of documents, and there's a really yeoman's work that Gary is doing, getting these documents in front of us, making sure we work on them, but do ask around and figure out, how do I take niblets of these things that are useful, but for one purpose, and that is building my community around me so that I can actually do my job. A lot of us, the reason why Gary does this podcast and the video series is for the unsung heroes. We're unsung in many ways, because if we do our job 100% right, nobody knows anything. We do it 1/4%. One day we let something through, everybody knows us. And if that's all that they know us for, we're a bunch of bozos who don't know what they're doing. We don't know security. Nobody cares about the 99.9999% that got protected. But that 0.001% that does get through, we're going to get hammered. And the only way to protect that is to not be alone.
Well, fantastic, recap of that. And, to me, one of the things that we've seen lately, because of the Colonial Pipeline attack, actually affected citizens in their pocketbooks or their ability to get gas. And, something that's in the back of my head, do not mess with Americans' meat, like the JBS, attack and things like that. So it does seem like this giant aircraft carrier is starting to turn a little bit more towards us. Sam, let's delve into some of the key objectives of the Cyberspace Solarium report. This is a quote from them in very general terms. They are saying that the U.S. Must work with allies and partners to promote responsible behavior in cyberspace. How do we get the world to play nice in cyberspace when we have nation state enemies, criminals, all that?
Well, I'll address that question, but I want to go back to a point that Shahid made. The Solarium Commission calls for the reconstitution of Congress's Office of Technology Assessment. And I think that's a foot stopper. There isn't a single issue, I think, today where science and technology don't play an absolutely key role in understanding the world around us and crafting useful policies. And I don't think it was helpful for Congress to lose that capability. They've tried to reconstitute it by having some tech-savvy staff, but the truth of the matter is that having a dedicated unit supporting Congress from this perspective, particularly as in an issue as important as cybersecurity, which affects national security and economic security in every conceivable way, I think it's overdue to get this done. Ditto, I think that while many of the Solarium Commission's recommendations were adopted, I noticed that some associated with building a stronger workforce were not. The government continues to leak good people to the private sector, and the private sector itself doesn't have enough good people doing cybersecurity work. So, working the question of creating a stronger national workforce, whether it's to build good cyber warriors for the military or good cyber defenders in the private sector or in civil government, is vitally important. And getting, Gary, to the question that you posed. First, not everybody is always going to play nice. But if we do certain things, if we raise the level of expected behavior, if we make it clear that there are things legitimate countries do and things that they don't do, if we raise the cost to those to cyber criminals and cyber adversaries, those I think are important. We're not going to deter every act, but we can make it expensive enough and painful enough that those who do some of these things will really be sorry. And for countries who protect cyber criminals, we can not only sanction them, but we can hold them and hold their leaders complicit in an act that we would regard essentially as beyond the norm of an acceptable sovereign state. Now, in terms of working with allies and partners, Gary, a point I would make is that this country remains strong in the fact that we do have allies and we do have partners. Nothing is as strong as the NATO partnership. Nothing really is more enduring than our Five Eyes partnerships. We have a relationship around the world with countries which share our values, if not always our tastes, but share our values, share generally our preference for liberal democracy, for a liberal, interconnected world order. So by working with our Five Eyes partners, working with our NATO partners, working with partners in the Far East, the Republic of Korea, Singapore, Japan, India, the countries in the Australia, countries in the Quad, we can, I think, build a consensus as well as a set of combined capabilities for information sharing, for crisis management and emergency response that's much stronger than we could build on our own. And given that we want other countries to share in our interests, it is in our interest to share in their interests in the development of good cybersecurity. So is the cybersecurity of the United Kingdom important to the United States? Well, given their importance in world banking and commerce and as a key ally, absolutely. Is the cybersecurity of Japan's economy important to the cybersecurity of the United States? Who could say it isn't? Absolutely it is. So it's in our interest to work with them, and in turn, working with them makes us stronger. It leverages from an advantage we have that, frankly, our adversaries just don't enjoy. They don't have the same kind of natural relationships and alliances that we do, and that is a strength we've got and a disadvantage for them. We ought to make the most of it.
Indeed. And Chuck, you were nodding your head in agreement on a number of these points. And so let's unpack this a little bit more. Sam, I just want to touch on what he said about a cost. This happens to be the third primary objective of the Cyberspace Solarium Commission, to impose costs, and what's your assessment of that? How do we do a better job in making there be consequences?
Well, I think, too, I think Sam really covered it very well. I think we really need to do two things. One is create incentives among our allies for cooperation. Maybe it be trade incentives, maybe it be sharing of technology and R&D, obviously information sharing. to really make it sort of an exclusive club that you want to be part of. The second part is we need to agree among our allies that those who engage in bad behavior, which are easy to name, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, as some of the larger perpetrators of this, that they have to pay some economic price, not just dealing with business in the United States, but doing business in Australia, in the European community, other parts of Asia, Middle East, etc. I think we have to make it hurt. Economic consequences have a strong effect and a deterrent effect, and we can't really do much other than that unless we take military action, and we're not going to do that unless it's an extreme circumstance. So I think it's really an imperative to really build on the relationships that we already have existing in place and expand the cybersecurity cooperation element and make it a priority and make it well known globally that you're either with us or you're not with us. And then if we're operating as a unified group, it makes it much easier to do sanctions, to be able to limit activities that might be perceived to be damaging if it's an attack in a smaller country, where we can also take action as a group to say, since you did that, you're not getting trade allowances, we're going to restrict trade in certain areas, you're not going to have access to treasury. But there's some things we can do, and it has to be, I think, economic.
But, you mentioned something very interesting about kinetic or military action. I had the privilege of interviewing the former head of cybersecurity for the whole country of Israel. And he said something that really caught my attention, which was a couple of years ago. I asked him, I said, there was an airstrike on a building, I think he was in Gaza, that ostensibly took out a hacking operation. And I said, "Do you know anything about that?" And he just kind of gave me this wry smile, and he goes, "What am I going to say?" like that. And that's all he said. So, God forbid, we don't want to get into kinetic action, but I'll tell you something, the sense I get from the community, and let me check this, with all of you to see what you think, is people are leaning forward. They're kind of tired of being sitting ducks. I don't know. Let me just throw it out there, Shahid.
Yeah. So the way to look at this is that cyber world misbehavior does not have physical world repercussions. And as long as that delta is there between the cyber war misbehavior and a lack of physical world consequences, we're just going to yammer on, we're going to talk about it, etc. One thing we could do at the policy level is to allow a probe or a offensive attack to be legal to do a offensive attack back. Like, it is not currently legal for you to say, all right, company A has attacked you, therefore now you are legally able to attack them, right? Countries do that, companies do not. Now, very recently, when Microsoft was working with SolarWinds, the way that they solved a couple of the problems, and not just Microsoft, but a number of companies together, went on the offense. If we in the cyber world do not go on the offense, it would be like, for example, if North Korea started flying planes over the United States and we're like, hey, sure, come on in, check us out, see what we're going to do. We're not going to shoot down your planes, have free access to our airspace. We would never say that. We'd be insane to say that. But we are absolutely saying, have free access to cyberspace, do whatever you want to do, and we're not going to do anything back to you, right? That's our current strategy, which is insane, right? It makes no sense whatsoever. The problem is we, both in the cyber community, because we're so digitally focused, we just assume everybody understands all of this danger. No, we have to communicate this and say a probe of our network is simultaneously equivalent to a drone flying over a city trying to discover the layout of that city for a physical attack. Nobody probes your network for good, right? Meaning for an adversary. An adversary is only probing you for weaknesses, right? In these cases. So once we see, and if we do not make equivalences, and the policymakers are starting to think about these equivalences, and to be fair to them, cyber security problems have only been around maybe 50 years, right? So we're not talking, but real war, we've been fighting for thousands of years, so we have some idea. So Gary, I think the simple answer to this, both on the cost side And the working with folks side, number one, you have to make it unprofitable for countries to house cyber criminals. And it is currently not unprofitable. It's very profitable because those hackers bring in goods and services, and then they buy goods and services where they are. So let's not pretend that somehow hacking doesn't have significant benefits. It absolutely does. And the second thing is allow offensive retaliation for offensive incursion, period.
But, you know, I wish it were kind of exactly that simple, but maybe, you know, any one of you can unpack this for me.
Sure.
That the impression that I have is when we were to hack back, is a phrase commonly referred to there, do they actually get the code, you know, of the attack, and can they use it against us or against other people? I don't know who would.
This is a very difficult conversation. So first, here's the part with which I agree. As a country, as a sovereign government, our government should take whatever steps, including counterattacking, it feels it needs to take to be able to protect the United States, because that is a responsibility of our sovereign government. And whether they do it well or not, it is their responsibility, and they shouldn't be relieved of it. And I think our government is under increasing scrutiny to do the best job it can. The Solarium Commission calls for essentially, you know, hunt forward the ability to get onto an adversary's networks and to disrupt those attacks, to know so much about the adversary that in essence they're not in a position to launch either an attack or an exploit against us. And I would say that some of that has probably started to occur. You may have seen media reports that in 2018 up at Fort Meade, a group called the Russia Small Group was constituted under General Nakasone, which in essence took the fight to the Russians and said, you will not interfere in the election in 2018. We know who you are. We're not going to permit it, and we're in a position to do something about it. I think that's an act of a sovereign government. And we don't have to, by the way, respond in kind. An attack against one of our systems can be responded to in any number of ways, including trade sanctions, economic, political, diplomatic, and other means. We don't have to limit ourselves to our adversaries' means. We can do what we think we need to do. Now, the part that I worry about is the possibility that companies or individuals take this upon themselves. We do not have letters of marque in this government. We do not allow mercenary activity in the country, and for good reason. Attribution can be tough. A counterattack could take out a domestic target, or it could take out innocent people, or it could hit the wrong country or the wrong infrastructure. I think allowing that sort of activity to become, in essence, something we do, and we say, private citizens can do it, and that's now a norm, and the United States supports that as a behavioral norm, I think is dangerous, and it destabilizes the entire system. And it also gives adversaries even more cover to allow essentially their non-state actors, or as the Chinese call them, their cyber patriots, free rein. I think what we want to do is rein in that activity among our adversaries rather than adopt it ourselves and then have it be considered a behavioral norm by the rest of the system because the United States and its allies are doing it. I feel very strongly on this point.
Yeah. No, and I generally agree with you, Sam.
We can and get the government to do its best job without, in essence, telling the government that it should cede that responsibility. No, and I'm 100% agreeing with you not to cede the responsibility. Where I think we could use some policy guidance is how much should a attack on a company be seen as a commercial attack? So if a North Korean drone flew over the Pacific Ocean and attacked a U.S. facility, that would not be seen as a commercial attack, right? Because just because it's a pizza show. I agree with that. I agree with that point.
That's the point that I was making.
If another country is allowing its soil to be used, I think they need to understand that if they're allowing their soil to be used and they're not taking the enforcement actions associated with a legitimate state, then in fact, our country, our government can assume jurisdiction in this matter and do whatever it needs to do. That, I think, is absolutely correct. And I would say that increasingly, while people are looking at some level of cyber espionage as unpleasant, but not outside normative activity, some of it which can actually affect, for example, our infrastructure, what happened to JPS or what happened to Colonial, is absolutely, in my view, an act that could place the nation at risk. And it absolutely can't be considered as, quote, some kind of acceptable level of espionage or theft of information. I think it went well beyond that. So I certainly think that the government of the United States should hold those actors responsible and hold their governments responsible as well.
Let's delve into that here. I'm going to, we'll pop up on the screen the first of the report card that came from the Cyberspace Solarium Commission. As you see, the title is The Progress of the Recommendations. There were a total of 82 recommendations, with, prima facie for me seemed like a lot, and a lot of specificity to, build on what Shahid said. So just in case it's a little small, 22% have been implemented, which is green. Near implementation is about 13%, on track, another 43%, 15% limited, and significant barriers, 5%. What is y'all takeaway of that first report card about how it's going?
Not bad. Look, here are some things that have happened. More resources are being put into places like the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency at DHS, and it's getting more authority and more, as we say in government and in politics, is getting more heft. I think that's a good thing. Getting a national cyber director, probably a very good thing, and giving that person some authority to do more than just be the orchestra conductor, but hopefully to cause actions to be taken to help shape budgets and the government's budget requests to Congress. I think that's a good thing. I'd like to see, I think the emphasis on science and technology is there. I think we're seeing an upturn in some of the R&D budgets that we need to see. Places where I don't think we're making as much progress, we still haven't built a whole of nation cybersecurity research and development strategy. We haven't done it, still need to do it. And I think that remains essentially a deficit in our overall progress. Such a strategy, Gary, is not just saying we have one, but who's in the community, who's responsible for what, where does it get directions, how does it decide and allocate resources against key problems. That's what a strategy has. We don't have one that involves government and academia and industry and everybody else. So that, I think, is one of the next steps.
Well, just to build on that point, forgive the interruption, Sam. I just wanted to build on that point that I saw an interview recently with former director Chris Krebs of CISA. Just, he's a real life unsung cyber hero, if ever there was one. And he was talking about, and I'll remember this quote, he said, "We have an embarrassment of riches of talent that is now in the White House and the administration." He meant Ann Neuberger, Jen Easterling, and the list kind of goes on and on. It seems that we have some really great people now at CISA. I'm a monster fan of CISA. We've done many shows to shine the light on their great work, to protect the nation's critical infrastructure and things like that. Chuck, what's your assessment of our talent compared to adversaries?
Well, I concur. I think Jen Easterly and Ann are terrific people to be in charge. I think since CISA is very young as an organization, we're still in a growing stage, and we still have to deal with a lot of bureaucracy, which is part of government anyway. So having things happen rapidly is not an easy task, no matter how much money and resources you throw at it. So it's going to take time, but it's good to have those people in place to lead things. I think one of the best things that's coming out recently is this joint office with public-private cooperation, which not only involves DHS, but includes DOD and the intelligence community too, and DOE. And I think, perhaps really where we should draw lessons is more from the intelligence community, NSA, and other three-letter agencies, and DOD, who've been putting a lot of resources and time and new technologies and research into some of the tools that are necessary to fight the battles. And I think that's where the civilian sector could learn more rapidly and get ideas and lessons learned if it's willing to be shared. And that's always been a problem in government with the barriers put up. So I think with this group in place, particularly Ann Neuberger, who comes out of that intelligence community, I think maybe some of those barriers be lessened and there'll be more cooperation. And I think that will expedite a lot of the activities along with cooperation with the private sector.
Yeah, you're looking at it. Forgive the interruption, Shahid. 1 second. I just popped up here. You're looking at the scorecard about strengthening cybersecurity norms, with non-military, sorts of means. Basically, there seems like there's a lot of work to go on the legislative front, which is what Sam and Chuck, you just brought up. Shahid, forgive the interruption. Go ahead.
Yeah, so just adding to that personnel question, so I think from a personnel perspective, we've actually always had good people. I don't think that's ever been our challenge. Earlier, there was an understanding and comprehension of where cyber fit in the national defense strategy. That has improved significantly as well. So when you look at personnel, we're in good shape. Budgets are now much, much better than they've ever been before. You can always say, hey, could I have more money? Where we still have a problem, though, is in procurement. So there's an act of hiring the right people at the government to do the things. There's an act of making sure the money is there. Now the question is, are you able to put out proper RFPs, procure the right things, get the contractors to do the right thing? This is where all of our great, think about it, all of our good wishes go up and hit the slamming part of where government comes, and that is we are terrible at procuring the right thing. Right? And you see over the last 5 years, CCM and some of the things that the government is trying to do is to make sure don't buy from companies that are insecure. That's only 2 or 3 years old, right? We're in 2021. It's only been a few years since we have put in actual, testable, verifiable validity of cybersecurity maturity in our supply chain. If we don't solve that, and government, because government is literally the largest purchaser of IT in the world. If the government, as the largest producer of IT in the world, establishes a much better framework for procurement, then it raises the bar for everyone else. You can have great people and good money, but if you don't have good procurement practices, we're back to square one.
Indeed. And my first introduction to the CMMC was I was invited to give a speech at MITRE, coincidentally, to about 200 federal employees pertaining to how to communicate this complicated information, throughout the universe. And one of the things that I learned about this is the need for alignment. People literally have to be on the same page, which is why I think it's so great that we actually have pages. The Cyber Solarium report, Cyberspace Solarium report. Chuck, you have anything you want to add to that? I'm just showing.
Yeah, well, I just want to actually, I think, to add to what Shahid said, I think procurement is a huge issue. And part of that problem, too, also is the legacy systems that are so embedded in all these various agencies that we're reluctant to modernize and abandon. And I think that's part of the other challenge of procurement. You have companies, and they've been there for decades, that just sort of do task orders on them. So this is not going to be an easy challenge, and maybe that's something for the commission to tackle next. But procurement is a real problem. It's not just related to cybersecurity; it's pretty much related to everything in government. So I think that's a real weakness in our national security posture.
Yeah, and that's worth hammering home. And I'd love for Sam to talk about that as well. Is what are the policy levers, if available legislatively? What are the policy or regulatory levers available on the executive side to actually do something, anything about our procurement, almost like cruft? I mean, we've built in decades upon decades of cruft here. And, Chuck said it nicely. There are legacy vendors here that are not going to let go, right? So asking them to do there is no business model in government to do the right thing, right? So you're just going to keep milking what you have. What do you guys think is just some small things we can do to let some of the innovators in that couldn't otherwise make it in without legislative or regulatory policy levers?
Well, there are some things that are happening. So first, the Department of Defense has the Defense Innovative, DIUX, which is trying to do looking for innovative technologies and bring them quickly into government. DARPA, IARPA, in the intelligence community, and now a version at DHS are trying to use essentially what are called other OTA, other authorities for acquisition to be able to, other transaction authorities to be able to do rapid acquisition. There are a couple of things I would do to make this a lot stronger. First, I think that the results of the science and technology and research and development that the agencies are doing needs to be exposed to industry a lot faster. What happens is, in some cases, technology is developed and then it's dead-ended. Like, this is a good idea, but how does it get implemented? I think if you want to get it implemented, get it into the hands of the private sector and let them work with it. Maybe compete for, hey, here's a new technology the government has developed. Let's have a competition for the best way to use it. That might be one useful thing to do. The second thing is one thing I think we've got to do is get past, and I told myself I would never again try to get into procurement reform in the government. But, anytime there's a major procurement, a couple of things go wrong. First, the procurement cycle can take months, if not years. And when you have a situation in which technology is cycling every few months, and what you do is, and I'm going to have to stop because I have a 2 o'clock. And what you do is you have a procurement cycle that takes years, and the technology is turning every few months. You lose the benefits a lot of that technological innovation. The other thing that can go wrong is that almost any procurement of any size is likely to be subject to a protest. So, and I recall this happening at DHS when they were putting in place a major contract that was protested for another, a year and a half, 2 years, by which time the technology associated with it had probably become, less current than it would otherwise have been, because in 2 years, technology does change and change quite a lot, right? Yeah. So the one thing the government needs to do is to do a better job in making defensible decisions and saying, this is where we're going to go. And sorry you didn't win this round, and compete in the next one. That's the way it's going to be, or find another opportunity. But we're not going to hold up every procurement indefinitely while we wait for this. Indeed. But I do think improving the science and technology cycle and coupling it explicitly to acquisition is something that urgently needs to happen.
Sam, on that note, on behalf of a grateful digital universe, thanks so much for who you are and what you do and why you do it, and for joining us today. And for our audience, stay tuned. Sam's going to be returning with the CEO of Iridium, Matt Desch, talking about security in space. Sam, how do people get in touch with you?
They can always get in touch with me at svisner@mitre, MITRE.org, svisner@mitre.org, or ssv@georgetown.edu. Both will do it.
Well, thank you so much, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you. My pleasure. Out here.
What an amazing guy, isn't he?
Yeah. And I think so one thing we could talk about, Gary, is in a future episode, get some procurement folks on. Like, if you actually want to change how life operates in the cyber world, look at the procurement guys and see how many handcuffs upon ropes and ties, and they've got little literally they have covers on their head. They can't see anything. Wow. They can't talk about anything. Get a few of those on and let them argue and say, what could Congress do? That's the legislative side. And then what could the executive branch do through just regulatory action? There's a lot of levers that can be pulled. The problem is we don't talk about it, and it's because it's so boring. Like, who the hell?
I love it. Shahid, I've never had a scoop. And I'm not sure this is one. I have a feeling the issue you've shined light is kind of well known. But if you know, or if our audience knows a couple procurement people that are allowed to talk in public, great. I would love to do a show on that very important series of bottlenecks that we need to solve. And, it sounds like we need to solve them pretty fast. As we're wrapping up here, for our audience, here's how you can get a copy of the report. You can download it here, or you can just look up Cyberspace Solarium Commission. You'll see some incredibly interesting and very useful tools and recommendations. So we hope that helps you. So Chuck, as we're kind of wrapping up here, this is your first time on the show. What did you think about the show so far?
Oh, it was great. Looking forward to coming back. And I love the conversation. Fantastic guests. So that it makes it much more enjoyable to be on a show where the discussion is all on point.
Great. Yeah, I'd love to hear that. And Chuck, how do people get in touch with you?
The easiest way to find me is on LinkedIn. I have almost 73,000 followers there, and just follow me out and reach out to me there, and I'll get back to you. Also on Twitter at Chuck D. Brooks.
Okay, terrific. And last but not least, Shahid, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think that these kinds of unsung hero discussions are fantastic, and I think if we can find the unsung heroes in legal policy, procurement, etc., that really have enormous amounts of influence in how we, on the technical side, do our business. This is, we talked a little bit earlier about making sure that companies are connected to other companies and that we connect to each other. One thing we're actually very bad about is lawyers talking to engineers and engineers talking to doctors and then doctors talking to, a manufacturing plant worker. In order to try to solve our problems, they're so complicated, they cannot be done in our swim lanes only. You have to broaden that sphere. And just this discussion, for example, of procurement, and that's why I love the question about personnel. Personnel can only go so far because those personnel are asked to do the right thing in the right structure, ethically within boundaries. None of our adversaries have to worry about any of those boundaries. So we have to unshackle them. And sometimes the unshackling has nothing to do with technology. It has to do with things like budgets or personnel, but more important, what can we buy and how do we actually control that would be a great thing to talk about in future episodes.
Indeed. And not coincidentally, we're launching the Cyber Hero Network. This is a rather innovative concept for us to become the next generation media platform in cybersecurity. And the word network has a double meaning in our use in that, number one, it's a network or kind of broadcast or this kind of video production. But to me, the even greater value is connecting high-level people to accomplish exactly what we just talked about. And we're using a kind of a little bit of a Gartner model, a little bit of a Forrester research model, where for an annual subscription, you can become part of the Cyber Hero Network and have different benefit packages and getting access to high-level people about things that everyone cares about, all with the idea of shining the light on the unsung cyber heroes who toil in anonymity to keep us safe. If you'd like to learn more about our show, or you'd like to be considered a guest on our show, Chuck, feel free to invite any of your great people or people. I love academics who are studying and raising our next generation of unsung cyber heroes, the students. We can do a show about that if you want. Bring some kids on, talk about what their journey's like, what things are going well, what things they need. We can talk about mentorships and one thing about our mission is it's never going to stop because all this stuff is just getting increasingly complicated and more important. In the healthcare sector, Shahid, really like life and death. So again, to our audience, thanks to all of you for being who you are and what you do and why you do it. And we'll see you soon.
Take care.